I'm not ashamed.
Should we worship men like Moses and Elijah? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Matthew on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Matthew chapter 17. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 13. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Matthew chapter 17, beginning at verse 1. Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud, saying, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. But Jesus came and touched them and said, Arise, and do not be afraid. When they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Now as they came down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, Tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man is risen from the dead. And his disciples asked him, saying, Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Jesus answered and said to them, Indeed, Elijah is coming first and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has come already, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Likewise, the Son of Man is also about to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. In today's reading, we have a magnificent scene, the Transfiguration of Jesus. It occurred 6 days after the events at the end of chapter 16. It is interesting that all of the 12 disciples were not allowed to witness this event. Only Peter, James, and John, Jesus' closest disciples. By picking these 3 does not mean that Jesus despised the others, nor does it mean that Peter, James, and John were more important. It is just who Jesus selected, and we must respect this decision. Matthew tells us that they went up to a high mountain. The mountain is not identified, just like the place where Moses was buried is not identified. Otherwise, men and women would set up altars and tabernacles on it like Peter wanted to do later. Some speculate this mountain was Mount Tabor in the lower Galilee region, most likely because we're going to find Jesus back in Galilee later on in this chapter, with Matthew not telling us beforehand that that is where they were going. The mountain could also be Mount Hermon, the mountain near Caesarea Philippi, where we found Jesus in chapter 16. What mountain this is not important. It's what happened on the mountain that we need to pay attention to. If you recall from chapter 16, Peter had confessed that Jesus was the Son of God, God himself, and now Peter was allowed to witness the truthfulness of that confession. While on earth, Jesus had a physical body. He did not possess his heavenly body. However, that does not mean that it was impossible for Jesus as God to possess this body while on earth. But if he did so, first of all, he wouldn't be able to die, a prerequisite if our sins were to be forgiven. And second, he would be so radiant and bright that it would be difficult for people to look upon him. Along with Jesus appeared Moses and Elijah, who spoke with Jesus. The apostles were living on this earth. Moses had died and gone to Hades, the realm of the dead, and Elijah never died, but was taken straight to heaven. Thus, the whole universe, both physical and spiritual, living and dead, were represented here. It would have been interesting to know what was said, but since the writers don't reveal that, it is useless to speculate. Peter, yet again, quick to speak, thought that the purpose of seeing this was so that they could worship Moses, the lawgiver, Elijah, the mighty prophet, and Jesus, the Son of God. A voice from heaven, however, corrected Peter by saying that this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. Moses and Elijah were mere men. They too were witnessing the majesty of Christ on this earth. But the person that needed to be listened to and followed was Jesus Christ, for he was God in the flesh, the one through whom the world would be saved. This voice from heaven, God the Father, so frightened Peter, James, and John that they fell on their faces. Jesus changed back into his earthly form, came over to them, and comforted them by saying that they weren't to be afraid, but arise with him and go down the mountain. He also commanded them not to speak of this vision until after Jesus had been risen from the dead, something that they obviously obeyed, for how else would Matthew be able to report to us these events? Once reunited with the disciples, he returned to teaching them. They asked him why the scribes say that Elijah must come first. This was obviously an objection to Jesus as the Messiah that the scribes had, for they didn't believe that Elijah had come, so how could Jesus be the Messiah? Jesus confirmed that Elijah must come first, but he said that he already did come, but the scribes did not know it. They did with this Elijah what they pleased, and Jesus would be no different, for he would also suffer at their hands. The disciples understood that Jesus was talking about John the Baptist. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Matthew 17, verses 14 to 21, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
I'm not a...
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
of his cross.